You know that moment when everyone around you seems excited about something and you quietly hope it passes without much attention? The messages start coming in. People begin asking about plans. Someone suggests dinner or a party, or at the very least, doing something special. And instead of feeling excited, there's a small tightening inside. Not dramatic, just a quiet resistance. You might smile, say thank you, go along with it, but privately, a part of you wishes the whole thing could just slip by like any other day. Most people assume something simple when they see this. They think the person who doesn't want to celebrate is being distant, or ungrateful, or maybe a little strange. After all, birthdays are supposed to be happy. They're supposed to be about attention, celebration, being surrounded by people who care about you. So when someone seems uncomfortable with all of that, it gets interpreted as a personality flaw. But in many cases, what's happening isn't about dislike. It's about something deeper in the way that person experiences attention, identity, and emotional exposure. And birthdays, strangely enough, touch all three at once. People often talk about birthday avoidance like it's just a quirk, but psychologically it's rarely random, because birthdays are one of the few days in life where the social spotlight becomes unavoidable. The day is centered around you, your life, your age, your presence. And while some nervous systems experience that spotlight as warmth, others experience it as pressure. Not because they dislike people, but because being the center of attention activates something different inside them. Researchers who study social processing often talk about something called self-focused attention. It's what happens when awareness turns sharply inward. You become conscious of how you look, how you're being perceived, whether you're responding correctly. For some people, that state is energizing. But for others, it creates a subtle sense of exposure. And birthdays amplify that state dramatically. Suddenly, everyone is looking at you, talking about you, evaluating your reactions. Even kindness can feel intense when it arrives all at once. There's also something else happening beneath the surface. Birthdays aren't just social events, they're markers of time. They quietly force a person to reflect on their life trajectory, where they've been, where they are, and whether they're where they thought they would be by now. For some personalities, that reflection feels meaningful. For others, it feels uncomfortably personal. Psychologists studying temporal self-awareness have found that milestone reminders, like birthdays, often trigger deeper life evaluation. And that process isn't always celebratory. Sometimes it's reflective, sometimes it's complicated, and sometimes a person would simply rather not turn that reflection into a public event. But perhaps the most interesting layer sits even deeper than that. A lot of people who feel uncomfortable celebrating their birthday didn't develop that reaction randomly. It often traces back to how attention felt earlier in life. In some environments, attention felt conditional. Praise came with expectations. Recognition came with pressure. Being noticed meant performing in some way. In those environments, the nervous system quietly learns something. Visibility equals responsibility. When the spotlight turns on, something is required. A certain response, a certain personality, a certain version of yourself. So over time, some people develop a subtle preference for emotional privacy. Not isolation, privacy. They enjoy connection, conversation, relationships, but they feel most comfortable when the focus moves naturally between people instead of resting entirely on them. Birthdays disrupt that balance. The day becomes singular, the attention concentrates, and the nervous system, shaped by past experiences, responds with a quiet instinct to step out of the center. None of this means someone dislikes appreciation. In fact, many people who avoid birthday celebrations are deeply moved by thoughtful gestures.
a meaningful conversation, a sincere message, a quiet moment of recognition. What tends to feel uncomfortable is the scale, the performance of celebration, the social choreography. There's also a subtle identity component involved. Some personalities are naturally more inwardly oriented. Psychologists sometimes describe this as an internal frame of reference. People with this orientation define themselves more through private experience than external validation. Their sense of self forms quietly, through reflection, values, personal meaning.
So, when a day arrives that publicly defines them, assigns attention, expectations, and narratives, it can feel oddly misaligned with how they actually experience themselves. It's not rejection. It's a kind of emotional mismatch. And society doesn't always understand that, because culturally, celebration is framed as something universally desired. Attention is interpreted as affection. Enthusiasm is interpreted as appreciation. So when someone doesn't react that way, it creates confusion. But human nervous systems aren't identical. Different people regulate attention, emotion, and identity in different ways. Some feel most alive when surrounded by energy and celebration. Others feel most grounded in quieter forms of connection. Neither is more emotionally healthy than the other. They're simply different emotional architectures. And here's the paradox that often surprises people. The same sensitivity that makes someone uncomfortable with birthday attention is often tied to something else entirely: depth. People who prefer quieter recognition often process emotional experiences very intensely. They notice subtleties others miss. They reflect more deeply on time, relationships, meaning. A birthday for them doesn't just represent another year. It can represent questions about life direction, personal growth, lost time, changing identity. While others experience the day socially, they experience it internally, which is why the celebration can feel strangely disconnected from the actual emotional weight of the moment. And yet, there's a quiet strength in that orientation.
Because people who engage with life this way often build relationships that are deeply authentic. They value sincerity over spectacle, meaning over performance, connection over attention. But of course, that depth comes with its own trade-off. In a world that celebrates visible enthusiasm, quiet emotional styles can easily be misunderstood. Reserved becomes distant. Reflective becomes ungrateful. Private becomes antisocial. When in reality, none of those labels capture what's really happening inside. Sometimes a person simply experiences attention differently. Sometimes their nervous system prefers smaller emotional spaces. Sometimes celebration feels more real when it happens quietly. None of that makes someone broken. It simply means their emotional wiring processes recognition in a different way. And when you start to see it through that lens, the discomfort around birthdays stops looking strange. It starts looking like something deeply human. A nervous system protecting its sense of balance. A personality that values authenticity over performance. A person who experiences life less as a stage and more as an inner landscape. If any part of this felt familiar, there's probably more to your psychology that follows this same quiet pattern. And once you begin noticing it, you start seeing how many parts of your life were shaped by the same subtle instincts.